I'm Wyatt Cash with Scoop News Group, and we're here with Portor Shomo, Vice President of Federal at Alteryx. Porter, thank you so much for joining us today.
Thanks, Wyatt, for having me. It's a pleasure to be here.
Well, let me start by asking, what does IT modernization look like and mean in government in 2021?
That's a great question. I mean, 2021 is a completely different world from 2019, isn't it? I mean, in 2021, we're emerging from a global pandemic, which is unlike anything we've experienced in the last 100 years. But 100 years kind of post the first pandemic, we have such significant technology advantages in place that are enabling us to function in ways the world never could 100 years ago. From our kids being able to attend school virtually to many industries having to suddenly pivot to 100% remote work. I think we're seeing a lot of advantages IT brings into our lives. And sure, I acknowledge not everything is rosy with IT modernization. Some people have their complaints, but the ability to keep the country and the economy functioning and moving forward while we waited for vaccines so that we as citizens could return to normalcy has been a huge lift. So where does that leave us with IT modernization in government for 2021? I think we're seeing that flexibility is kind of the key characteristic of IT. Being able to react to change is key. Without delving into a cookie cutter answer about cloud deployments or DevSecOps, I'll just say that technology needs to help us support flexibility in both our work and our personal lives. An angle that we at Alteryx are especially interested in is big data. And I've been super impressed with how a lot of the state and local entities reacted to the pandemic by aggregating information quickly and effectively and putting it out for its citizens to see so that they could make the best, most informed healthcare choices as the pandemic impacted them. That was pretty inspiring.
Well, next, how did the pandemic affect the need to modernize more rapidly in your experience working with agencies?
So I think that's a great question. I think there's going to be a lot of reflection that comes out of this pandemic of what worked well and what did not work so well, especially with government having to pivot so quickly to remote work. I think folks will look hard at which technologies allowed agencies to function effectively during the pandemic, what technologies outperformed. Was it the cloud? Was it agencies who invested heavily in COTS technologies? How did the legacy applications fare? These are going to be questions that are looked at. The pandemic reinforced that the ability to quickly and effectively deal with change is one of the most important skills we can have. IT that's flexible while still allowing the operators to perform their mission has been key. From an Alteryx perspective, we saw the need for organizations to quickly move to remote methods of working that still allowed government employees to interact with and access data and share insight. Secondly, we saw government organizations that needed to quickly automate large transactional processes to keep up with demand. For example, when a state's unemployment system went from 2,000 applicants a month to suddenly needing to process 2 million applications, they had to turn to analytic automation to do that, to help restore the capability to deliver a vital support to the people. And finally, it's hard not to answer this question and think about medical without thinking about the medical use cases that we all have gotten familiar with, like disease management and contact tracing and healthcare facility location optimization. I think we'll see some structural changes coming out of the pandemic, especially around HHS. If you think back to DHS's formation after September 11th, HHS has had its defining moment, which has been the pandemic, right? And they did so many things well. I mean, let's not lose sight of just how impressive it's been to come up with 3 working vaccines in a year. But when we go back and we revisit what we did right, we'll also look at what we could do better to make sure that the next event, whether it be a pandemic or other event, we're optimized to handle it.
Well, at this juncture, what major priorities stand out in your mind for modernization in government today, kind of moving forward?
Yeah, that's a great question too. So developing workforce skills is probably the #1 priority that I see government modernization needing to address. And that's not to say that we don't have a skilled government workforce, we do. But as you know, Wyatt, technology is changing rapidly, right? It changes rapidly from week to week, from year to year. We have coming revolutions in things like artificial intelligence and machine learning, which will really help the government optimize the use and collection of data. And that'll be a key priority. Data science, as we've all heard, is a really cool new field. If I were to use a baseball analogy, now that we've started baseball season, I would say if data science were a 9-inning game, we would still be in the pregame warmups. But if you think about where the jobs are going to be over the next 20 years, it's all going to be data analysis jobs, right? The ability to work with, to prepare, to apply analytics to, and then to decide based on whatever data package you're being fed, what to do, right? These are going to be key jobs and key skills we need to have. So we recognize at Alteryx that the data is only as good as the quality and the cleanliness of data that we collect. How quickly we can get from collection to ultimately an analytics package is key. We have to eliminate bias in interpreting and cleansing that data. And bias can be human bias or it can be machine bias. Actually, machines have bias as well. We need to take care of those things to get the best, most informed, aggregated data sets, turn it into information so that people can make better, more informed decisions. From a government perspective, we're going to have to invest in additional training so that our government analysts can ultimately become citizen data scientists. Analysts are great, they have a lot of skill, but we need to continue the journey to help those folks learn more and more and more. In fact, PwC just had a really neat announcement within the last 2 or 3 days where they're actually training 6,000 of their associates on data wrangling, which is all about taking the average analyst and turning them into a citizen data scientist. If a government agency is lucky enough to have true data scientists, well, we certainly need to celebrate what they can do. Their skills in math are beyond compare, but we have to create an environment where the work they produce is more usable by the masses, right? We have to be able to take what they do to leverage it, down chain to the citizen data scientists. And furthermore, we have to invest in and upskill the workforce to leverage both AI and ML. From an IT perspective, flexibility and nimbleness will be key as we navigate from event to event. If you think back, 2020 and 2021 were all about the pandemic, but before that, we were dealing with multiple major hurricanes hitting the US. We don't necessarily know what the next event is going to be, so we have to have technology, infrastructure that's flexible and allows us to pivot quickly from event to event.
Well, lastly, Porter, after modernization, what comes next?
So, Wyatt, having been in the industry now and working with the government for a long time, I'll say that I think, and this is kind of a personal opinion, I think we need to tackle this great tension that has always been here, that's just laid below the surface of government IT, which is the tension of being able to get the most cutting edge innovations into the government for use versus our need to secure them so that they're impenetrable, right? If you think about it, it's a tug of war, and usually one side has a slight advantage, but we need to find a way where both sides win. And what I mean by that is we have to keep up with, our adversaries in the rapid advances and in deploying artificial intelligence and machine learning. And to do that, we have to figure out how to get the tools in, which are often built for non-government use cases quickly and more effectively. At the same time, as you know, there's a lot of talk right now about security throughout government, the ability to make sure that things are locked down and the people who access them have the rights to access them, especially coming out of the SolarWinds hack recently. So we have to figure out what that balance is. If we get that right, there's no limit to what we can do. Ultimately, applying the advances in AI and ML will lead our government to maintaining its critical advantages over its adversaries. But if you think back, I actually first heard this quote when I read an economist article probably 12 years ago, and I thought they wrote it, which is data is the new oil. It actually wasn't written by the economist. It was written by a British mathematician named Clive Hemby. It was actually said by him first in 2006. Well, if data is the new oil, then the future is going to be information advantage derived from the data in a sort of information arms race, whereby having a highly trained federal workforce who have the requisite skill to handle the data in a meaningful capacity, working in concert, not replaced by, but working in concert with things like ethical artificial intelligence, machine learning, will give us the best chance to respond more quickly and to help lessen the impact of events that may or may not happen. Events like we can predict, like the things that are happening with climate change, or events that we maybe can't predict, like a natural disaster or a future pandemic. So I think in essence, that is probably what comes next after IT modernization.
Those are some great observations. Porter Shomo, thank you so much for taking time to share some of your insights on IT modernization with us today.
Why, it's been great. Thank you very much for your time.